My grandfather, Emile, never talked about his brother, Emanuel. The family story was simple. He was lost in the mountains during the war, long before I was born. When Grandpa died last year, I found his journal. The last entry, from 2015, just said, "We keep the watch." Tucked in the back was this map, and I recognized the rock formation. It was the same cave he'd warned me to stay away from my entire life. If this story resonates with you, or if you've ever uncovered a family secret that changed everything you thought you knew, leave a comment below. I'd like to know I'm not the only one. My name is Jackson. I'm telling this story in 2025, but it really begins in 1984, the year my great-uncle Emanuel vanished. And for me, it began last fall, with the death of my grandfather. Emile was not a complicated man, or so I thought. He was tall, even in his 80s. His hands were leather, carved from a lifetime of mending fences and working the unforgiving soil of our high-altitude valley. He was quiet. Not a mean quiet, but a deep, settled quiet, like a stone at the bottom of a river. He lived his whole life in the same 3-bedroom house his father had built, and when he passed, at 89, he left that house to me. For 6 months, I couldn't touch it. The silence of that house, once so comforting, now felt like an accusation. Finally, this spring, I knew I had to. I had to sort through the artifacts of a long life. I started with the study. The study wasn't much, just a small room off the living area, smelling of old pipes, paper, and the faint, sweet scent of sawdust. This was his sanctuary. I spent a day just sorting through receipts, tax documents from the 1990s, manuals for tractors that had long since rusted into the earth. I was on autopilot, my mind numb, placing items into boxes. Donate, keep, trash. The grief was a low hum in the back of my head. It was the keep box that was the problem. Everything felt like I was throwing him away. A set of worn-out wrenches. A framed photo of my grandmother, who died before I was born. A jar of old pennies. In the bottom drawer of his heavy oak desk, beneath a stack of old seed catalogs, was the journal. It wasn't hidden, not really, but it wasn't on display either. It was bound in dark brown leather, so soft it felt like skin. The cover was blank. I almost put it straight into the keep box, thinking it was just another ledger, but I opened it. The first 100 pages were exactly that. My grandfather's neat, strong script. May 4th, 1982, planted corn, rows 4:10, weather clear. October 1st, 1983, mended fence by the creek. David lent me the post driver. July 12th, 1984, rain. I flipped through the pages. Years of weather, crops, and repairs. The mundane, beautiful rhythm of his life. Then, tucked into the inside back cover, I found the photograph. It's the one you see on the left. I knew these men. Or I had. That was my grandfather, Emile, on the far right. He looked burdened. His eyes were fixed on the photographer, but his mind was somewhere else. And next to him, the others. David, Julian, Amir, Elias, Reuben, the village elders. My grandfather was the last of them to go. I'd been to all their funerals over the years. In the photo, they stood shoulder to shoulder at the mouth of a dark cave. They weren't smiling. They weren't posing. They looked like men bearing a heavy, shared weight. The photo was dated on the back in my grandfather's hand. August 5th, 2015. I flipped back a few pages in the journal, looking for an entry for that day. It was there. It wasn't about the weather or the crops. It was just 5 words. August 5th, 2015. We keep the watch. I read it again. We keep the watch. A chill, unrelated to the dusty air in the study, ran straight up my spine. Then my fingers felt something else in the back pocket of the journal, a folded piece of paper. It was thicker than the journal pages, brittle at the creases. I unfolded it carefully. It was a map, hand-drawn but precise. Topographical lines sketched in black ink, a creek, a ridge, and a single path drawn in red that snaked up the eastern slope of the mountain. A path that ended at a small black X. Beside the X was a drawing of a rock formation. I knew it instantly. I would have known it anywhere. It was the Forbidden Cave. When I was a boy, maybe 10 or 11, I was adventurous. The mountains were my backyard. But there was one place, one rule, my grandfather was absolute about. "You do not go to the cave on the eastern ridge," he told me, his voice flat, leaving no room for argument. "Why, Grandpa?" I'd asked. "Snakes," he said. "Bad air. The rock is unstable. You go in, you don't come out. You stay away. You promise me, Jackson." I promised, and I'd kept it. Now I was holding a map to that very cave, drawn by the same man who told me to stay away. I looked at the photo of the elders. I looked at the map. I looked at the words, "We keep the watch." And then I thought of the one name that was never, ever spoken in this house. Emanuel, the ghost. The brother lost to an avalanche during the war in 1984. I went back to the journal entries. July 12th, 1984. Rain. I flipped the page. July 13th, 1984. Rain. July 14th, 1984. Rain. I kept flipping. The entries for the rest of July and all of August were blank. The daily record of his life just stopped. For 2 solid months. It picked up again in September. September 14th, 1984. Harvested beans. Poor yield. The war had been distant, a thing on the news, but the patrols had come through our mountains. They were looking for partisans, for deserters, for anyone. The official story was that Emanuel, who was young and strong and known to hike those ridges, was caught in an early, unseasonable avalanche while checking livestock. A tragedy. The mountain took him. But the mountain hadn't just taken him. The entries had stopped. And my grandfather, a man of routine, had stopped writing. I knew right then, sitting in that dusty chair, that the avalanche was a lie. I knew I had to go to the cave. It took me 2 days to prepare. Not for the hike itself. I knew the terrain, but for what I was doing. I was about to walk, deliberately, into the one place my grandfather had forbidden. It felt like a betrayal. But then I'd look at the journal. We keep the watch. Was I betraying him, or was I finally understanding him? Was I finishing something? I told no one. I packed a heavy pack, 2 high-powered flashlights, extra batteries, 100 feet of good climbing rope, water, protein bars, a first aid kit, and in a waterproof bag, I placed the journal. I left before dawn on the 3rd day. The air was sharp and cold. The eastern ridge is not a friendly place. There are no tourist trails. The path my grandfather had drawn in red ink was long gone, reclaimed by scrub oak and time. But the landmarks on the map were still there. Turn at the split rock. Follow the dry creek bed. It was a 3-hour climb. Hard work, my lungs burning. The whole time I was in conversation with my grandfather in my head. What are you making me do, Grandpa? What is this? Why did you keep this? Did you want me to find it? I thought about him and those other old men. In 2015, they would have been in their late 70s and 80s, making this same climb. It must have taken them all day. The thought of my stoic grandfather, his joints aching, hauling himself up this ridge, it gave me a new kind of strength. They weren't just going for a walk. They were on a mission. I scrambled over the last set of boulders, and then I was there. The mouth of the cave. It was exactly as it was in the photograph. A dark, jagged mouth set into a wall of gray granite. The silence was absolute. No birds, no insects. Just the sound of my own breathing, loud in my ears. I stood exactly where my grandfather had stood. I looked back at the valley, a green slash thousands of feet below. Then I looked into the darkness. It was cold, a deep, permanent cold, breathing out of the rock. I took out the journal. I laid the map on a flat stone. The map. 2. The cave was done. Now, the map of the cave. It showed the main passage going in about 200 feet. Then, on the left, a small notation. Wall. E. And behind the wall, a small, drawn chamber. I zipped up my jacket, put on my headlamp, and took the main flashlight in my hand. "Okay, Grandpa," I whispered. "I'm here. What did you watch?" I stepped inside. The world vanished. There was only the white circle of my light. The air was damp and smelled of minerals, of time. The floor was uneven, covered in scree. I walked slowly, flashing the light from floor to ceiling. The main passage was huge, like a subway tunnel. I counted my paces. I walked about 200 feet in, my light fixed on the left-hand wall, and I stopped. It was just rock. A flat, unremarkable section of the cave wall. I ran my hands over it. It was cold, solid. I pushed. Nothing. I looked at the map again. Wall. E. E for Emanuel, or E for Emile, or E for entrance. I felt a wave of frustration. Had I come all this way for nothing? Was this just the fantasy of an old man? I shined the light on the wall, inch by inch. I was looking for a crack, a seam, anything. And I found it. It was almost invisible. A vertical line, just a fraction of an inch wide, hidden by the natural texture of the stone. It wasn't natural. It was too straight. I pushed again, right on the seam. It was solid. I went back to the map. My eyes traced every line. And I saw it. A tiny word, written in my grandfather's smallest script, right next to the E. Lever. I went back to the wall. I searched the rock, not for a crack, but for something that moved. 10 feet to the right of the seam, partly hidden by an outcrop, was a rock that jutted out differently than the others. It looked like a natural handhold. I gripped it. It was cold. I pulled. Nothing. I pulled harder. I braced my feet against the cave floor and threw my entire body weight into it. A sound. A horrible, grinding scrape. The sound of stone on stone, a sound that hadn't been made in years. Dust and small pebbles fell from the ceiling. The rock lever moved down about 6 inches. And then, the wall moved. The section with the seam, a piece of rock 6 feet high and 3 feet wide, grated, shuddered, and then slowly pivoted inward, revealing a gap just wide enough for a man to squeeze through. The air that came out of the blackness. It was dead, stale, the smell of dust and something else, something organic. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I was terrified. This was a tomb. I knew it. I forced myself to be logical. The men in the photo were old in 2015. They came here. If it was safe for them, it was safe for me. I shone my light into the gap. It was a small chamber, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. It was not natural. The walls were too even. Someone had worked this space. I squeezed through the gap. I was in. I was in their secret. My light beam swept the room. In one corner, a pile of rotten cloth that might have been a bedroll. Next to it, a small stack of rotted wooden crates. On top of one of the crates, a rusted compass, a tin cup, and an old rusted rifle, the kind the partisans used during the war. And on the floor, next to the bedroll, was a small tin box, a biscuit tin from the look of it. I crouched down. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely work the lid. It was rusted shut. I used my pocket knife to pry it open. Inside, wrapped in a piece of oilcloth, was a stack of letters. They were tied with a simple piece of twine. I sat on one of the crates, the beam of my headlamp fixed on the tin in my lap. I untied the twine. The paper was yellow, and the handwriting was faint. It was not my grandfather's strong, clear script. This was weaker, more desperate. I opened the first one. July 16th, 1984. Emile. They're gone. The patrol is gone. I think they believed you. Thank you. The leg. It's bad, brother. It's bad. But I'm safe. I'm warm. I stopped. I read it again. Brother. This was Emanuel's handwriting. My grandfather. He hadn't just found him. He had hidden him. I read the next letter. July 22nd, 1984. Emile. The water was a blessing. The fever is... It's hot. I can't feel my toes. I think the infection is spreading. You are risking too much. David and Reuben, they are good men, but if the patrol finds you, finds this place, you will all be shot. You have a wife. You have a new son. You must stop coming. My hands were wet. I didn't realize I was crying. My grandfather, the silent, stoic farmer, had been smuggling food and water up this mountain, risking his life, his family's life, to save his brother. I read the next one. The handwriting was getting worse. The lines slanted. August 1st, 1984. It's no use. I know it. You know it. The medicine isn't working. It's in my blood. I'm so cold, Emile. I'm so cold all the time. But it's better this way. Tell them the mountain took me. An avalanche. It's cleaner. It's a good story. No one will look. No one will be to blame. Promise me. Tell them the mountain took me. I was choking on the dust, on the grief. Then I picked up the last letter. It was just a few lines, scrawled on a scrap of paper. August 4th, 1984. I can't see the page. Thank you for the watch. It was Father's. I can hear the ticking. It's the only sound. Keep the watch, brother. Don't let them find me. Let me rest here. I'm not scared. E. Keep the watch. It wasn't a vigil. It was a watch. A physical object. My grandfather's watch. I looked at my own wrist. I was wearing it. The heavy silver timepiece my grandfather had worn every day of his life. The one he left to me. It had been Emanuel's. My grandfather had given his dying brother his own father's watch as a comfort in the dark, and Emanuel had given it back. Keep the watch, brother. It was a password, a promise. I looked around the small, dark room, my vision blurred. I finally understood. The forbidden cave, the bad air, the unstable rock, they were all lies. Lies to protect this place, lies to honor a dying wish. My grandfather and his friends, they hadn't just hidden him, they had buried him. My light beam moved from the tin box to the far corner of the chamber. It wasn't just a pile of rocks. It was a cairn, a grave, neat, respectful, a stack of flat stones sealing a small alcove in the rock. This wasn't just a hideout. It was a tomb. My great-uncle Emanuel was here. He had been here 10 feet from me for 40 years. I sat there, in the cold, silent dark, for I don't know how long. An hour? 2? I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't even sad, not really. I felt a profound sense of peace. I felt full. The hole that Emanuel's ghost had left in our family. It was finally filled. I finally understood my grandfather. His silence wasn't coldness. It was a fortress. It was the 40-year-long weight of this secret. He had carried this cave, this grave, this promise, every single day. That photo from 2015. I understood it now. They were old men. They knew their time was coming. They had made one last climb, one last pilgrimage, to say goodbye, to check on the grave, to honor their promise. We keep the watch. They were the last 6 men who knew the truth. And with my grandfather's passing, the watch had ended. Until now. I carefully placed the letters back in the tin box. I put the lid on. I looked at the grave. "I'm Jackson," I said. My voice sounded loud, wrong. "I'm Emil's grandson, your nephew. I have the watch. It's safe. We'll keep it." I backed out of the chamber. I took the lever in my hands and pulled it back up. The heavy stone door grated, scraped, and swung shut, sealing the tomb once more. The seam vanished. It was just a wall. I stood in the main passage for a long time, my light on the solid rock. The secret was safe. The walk down the mountain was different. The world seemed clearer. The sun was brighter. The valley was greener. I felt like I was walking beside my grandfather. I felt his hand on my shoulder. I got back to the house, showered, and made a pot of coffee. I sat at the kitchen table, the tin box and the journal in front of me. The watch had passed to me, but I was alone. The other elders were gone. What was I supposed to do? I thought about Reuben, the man in the photo standing next to my grandfather. He had a daughter, Miriam. She still lived in the village. She was an old woman now, in her late 70s, sharp as a tack. She had known my grandfather her whole life. The next day I took the tin box and the journal, and I went to her house. She let me in, her eyes kind but questioning. "Jackson, it's good to see you. You look so much like Emil." We sat in her living room, filled with plants and old photos. I came to talk to you about my grandfather," I said, my voice unsteady, "and about your father." Her smile tightened. They were good men, the best. I didn't know how to say it, so I just opened the journal. I didn't show her the letters, not yet. I just showed her the map. And then I showed her the photograph of the 6 old men at the cave mouth. She stared at the photo. Her hand, wrinkled and spotted, came up to her mouth. I was clearing out his study," I said quietly. "I found his journal. The last entry was from 2015. It just said, 'We keep the watch.'" Miriam closed her eyes. A single tear rolled down her cheek. She didn't speak for a full minute. I just waited. "I wondered if anyone would ever know," she whispered. "I'm the last one who was told." "You knew?" I asked. "My father, Reuben. He told me right before he died. He made me promise not to tell. He said the secret was not a happy one, but it was a proud one. He said they had kept a promise. She looked at me, her eyes clear. Your great-uncle Emanuel. He wasn't lost in any avalanche. I know, I said. He was wounded. A patrol. Yes, she said. They were just boys, all of them. Emile and my father. They found him. He was hiding in a ditch. The patrol had shot him and left him for dead. They carried him. All 6 of them. They carried him up that mountain, to that old mining cave. They thought they could save him. They tried for weeks. Your grandfather was the one who went every night. He brought food, water, medicine he stole from the town doctor. She stopped, wiping her eyes. But the infection, it was too fast. When Emanuel knew he was dying, he made them promise. He was afraid the patrol would come back, find his body, and punish the village for helping him. He made them swear they would bury him there, seal the cave, and tell everyone the mountain took him. It was his last gift to them. He saved them, you see, by dying in secret. So they did, I said, my voice thick. They buried him, and they kept the secret for 40 years. They kept the watch, she said, nodding. Every year, on the day he died, they would meet, and after the village forgot, and it was safe, they started climbing. Once a year, to make sure the grave was safe, to be with him. The 2015 photo. That was their last trip. My father was already sick. He said it almost killed him. But they had to go. They knew it was the last time they would all be together. She looked at the tin box in my lap. What's in the box, Jackson? His letters, I said. His last words. Read them to me, she said. And so I did. I sat in her sun-filled living room, and I read Emanuel's fading words of fear and pain, and finally, of peace. We cried together, for the young man who died in the dark, and for the old men who carried that darkness for a lifetime, so we could live in the light. When I was done, Miriam put her hand on mine. The watch is yours now, Jackson. Your grandfather. He trusted you. He knew you would understand. He left you that map for a reason. I left her house that afternoon feeling lighter. The secret was still a secret. It didn't belong to the world. It belonged to the mountain. It belonged to Emanuel. And it belonged to the men who loved him enough to lie for him. I went back to my grandfather's house. It wasn't an empty, accusing place anymore. It was a monument. It was a house built on a promise. I took the tin box and the letters. I put them back in the journal. And I put the journal back in the bottom drawer of the old oak desk. Not hidden, just kept. My grandfather was a simple man. He planted corn, he mended fences, and he kept the most profound promise of his life, silently, for 40 years. I still wear his watch. Sometimes when the house is quiet, I can hear the ticking, and it sounds like a promise. If you had found that map, if you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Subscribe if you believe every truth, no matter how long it's buried, eventually surfaces.